Hey everybody, today we're going to identify the causes of the Civil War, including sectionalism, states' rights, and slavery, and the effects of the Civil War, including Reconstruction and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So what you see written in red is really what we will be focusing on all of this week and part of next week. And then that will be followed by looking at the Civil War itself, and then the effects of the Civil War, which is the rebuilding of the South once the war is over with, not only physically rebuilding it, but then politically rebuilding it by adding 3 new amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Our essential question for today is, how did changes resulting from the Industrial Revolution and westward expansion lead to conflicts among the North, South, and the West? So if you recall, with westward expansion, we had tens of thousands of people moving westward in pursuit of a variety of goals, whether it was to get rich quickly by finding gold in California and other places where minerals were discovered, or precious gems, for example, as well. Also, new farmland with rich, fertile soil, towns being built, all sorts of opportunities that allowed people to kind of reinvent themselves or to start all over again, and attracted immigrants from all over the world. We also have the Industrial Revolution that is going to contribute to that westward expansion and the development of the West, whereas mostly up until this time, we really are looking at a country that is kind of defined by the northern region and the southern region, and now we have this vast growing western region that is developing, and that comes with not only lots of opportunities, but certainly a lot of challenges as well. And they develop their own identity, just like the North and the South do, have their own particular culture and ways about them. And so eventually these ways will sort of come into conflict with one another. So the Industrial Revolution, sparked by factories, the creation of the railroad, that unites the East and the West, transcontinental communication by way of the telegraph, all sorts of things that we see now that will help to modernize the West as it continues to open up to development. So these 3 regions will, as I said earlier, will come into conflict with one another, and that's something we need to be thinking about as to how those things lead to the Civil War as we discuss it, begin discussing it today and really over the next few weeks. All right, so let's begin with sectionalism. The North and the South grow apart. Industry versus farming. After the Industrial Revolution, there was a shift from farming to manufacturing in many states. So manufacturing is, of course, working in factories, making all of our own goods as opposed to having all of our manufactured goods brought into us from Great Britain. And we learned after the War of 1812 that we really had to become more independent upon ourselves, more self-sufficient when Great Britain cut off trade with us. And so that shift into manufacturing our own products is quite beneficial to our country, and especially to the northern part of our country. So people had moved to the northern urban or city areas to work in factories. Factories provide better, more reliable jobs that are not dependent upon, whether or not the weather is going to be good that day or that week, or during a certain period of time of the year, like winter. It's something you can do every day of the year. And once electricity is added to factories, then factories can stay open 24 hours a day. And so this really is a boon to the northern economy during this day and age. Southern states' economy, though, however, is still based on agriculture. They have large plantations with lots of slaves, and so these plantations and new tools require even more slaves. And in particular, one invention overall, the cotton gin, is becomes so efficient at cleaning the seeds out of cotton that you need fewer slaves to clean cotton. So therefore, those slaves could be put to use planting cotton and harvesting cotton instead, and that will require more and more slaves. So the slave population begins to increase at a time that previous to the cotton gin looked as though it might actually start to fizzle out before long. The government, the North wanted a very strong central government, as opposed to the South wanting the states to have all the power. So again, it's the same argument that has really been going on since the Articles of Confederation, which gave all the powers to the states, and then the creation of the U.S. Constitution, where you had two groups of people, the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. One side that wanted a strong federal government, the other side that's the Anti-Federalists that wanted strong states government. So those divisions among government thought, and how it should be run continue to this point in time. And so almost to a point where in a couple of instances, a civil war could very easily have broken out as early as 1832 when tariffs were passed and on South Carolina, or in the South in particular, and South Carolina reacted very harshly to these protective tariffs that forced them to buy their goods from northern factories, which charged more for homemade goods, and they preferred to buy goods instead from Great Britain, where they got a much better deal. Well, now all of a sudden, tariffs or taxes on goods coming into our country from foreign countries is causing the prices of imported goods to go higher. And South Carolina absolutely refuses to go along with these tariffs. And they tell President Andrew Jackson at that time in 1832 that, we are a states' rights state. We are proud of that, and you can pass all the protective tariffs you want, but we're going to secede from the Union and do our own thing. And so at that time, there was already a lot of tension in the air regarding portions of the country breaking away from the other part of the country based on taxes. And again, this reignites, this argument is reignited in 1846, where President Polk, James Polk, and the Congress pass a law that lowers tariffs. Now this time it makes northern factory owners angry, makes the North angry, because whereas before taxes were high on goods coming into the United States, now those taxes are lower. And they don't like that because they want Americans to buy U.S. made goods. Well, if goods coming into the United States are lower from other countries, now Americans have a choice of buying, well, a U.S. made product, or that's more expensive, or a product that is made in another country that is cheaper. Today we have similar problems with items that are made in China, for example, that are cheaper than U.S. made goods. This made, of course, southern states happy because they wanted to buy cheaper goods from Great Britain. And so that's what they did, because goods in the northern factories were too expensive for them. So northern states wanted those higher tariffs so that taxes on imported goods would encourage Americans to buy goods from the north and not other countries. So again, this division just causes the north and south to break apart, not physically, of course, but along the lines of a disagreement on taxes and who should have to pay higher taxes, or whether or not protective tariffs or taxes should be passed on other countries that want to buy or sell goods to the United States. So sectionalism is the difference in geography and industrialization that shapes the culture and the economy of the North and the South and divides it into two regions. This division really has been going on since the settlement of Jamestown and the Plymouth colonies. They've settled for different reasons based on geography and climate. They developed differently because of the geography and climate of the area. And what they became good at doing, again, and how they made money, again, depended on the geography and the climate of the area, and their cultures developed a lot differently as a result of that. So you see the country really divided between the North, the South, and the growing West. Slavery in the North. By 1850, most northern states had outlawed slavery. Northern factories, however, had workers put in long hours under difficult conditions and for very low pay. And that's something we'll talk more about later on. Slavery in the South was allowed in southern states. Enslaved people grew cotton, tobacco, and rice, which were the three largest cash crops in the South at that time. Slavery was incredibly profitable to the economy of the South. The goods produced by the slaves brought in at least twice as much money as the cost of owning slaves was. So slavery is incredibly profitable, and it makes Southern plantation holders incredibly wealthy. Slavery in the South. 6 out of every 10 slaves worked in cotton fields. Cotton was grown on large plantations, but many worked in smaller farms. So not everybody in the South had hundreds of slaves. Small farms might have 1 or 2 slaves, and more often than not, the farm owner worked alongside the slaves in the fields. So they might have 1, maybe 2 slaves, but not even all Southern farm owners had slaves. So the idea that everybody that lived in the South was a slave owner is absolutely incorrect. The percentage of slave owners was significantly smaller than the number of people that actually lived there in that day and age. Slavery in the U.S. By 1860, enslaved African Americans in the United States totaled about 4 million people. So that's quite a staggering amount of slaves that existed at the right before the start of the Civil War. Most enslaved population lived in the South, while the free population lived in the North. I should say, though, that at the start of the Civil War, there were approximately 200,000 free African Americans that one way or another had earned their freedom, that were once slaves. They either worked a job outside of their slave responsibilities, I guess you could say, and saved up enough money to buy their own freedom, or their owners gave them their freedom when they died. But even though free or enslaved, whether they lived in the North and the South, they did not have voting rights as whites did, and suffered discrimination and were not considered full citizens of the United States. Different views on slavery. Abolitionists are those that oppose the practice of slavery and fought very hard to end it everywhere in the country. That should say country, not county. Began fighting against slavery in the United States after the U.S. Constitution was written and signed in 1787. And they fought for many decades to end slavery. Not only did they not want it to continue, but certainly wanted to prevent it from moving westward as people moved westward. Southern slave owners continued to defend slavery, saying that working in factories in the North was a much more hazardous environment for people to work. They had to stand all day doing the same repetitive actions, working around dangerous equipment, unsafe environment, no exposure to fresh air or the sunshine. And at least slaves were able to work outside and breathe in fresh air and feel the sun on their faces, and that was far better than working in the very hazardous environment of the northern factories.